Hello everyone, welcome to this week's virtual talk. We're really delighted this week to be welcoming back our operations manager, Caitlin Hoffman, who's going to be talking about Ben Franklin and coffee houses. So I'll hand over to Caitlin.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Eleanor. And so before I actually start the presentation, I just wanted to say a couple of kind of exciting newses here at Benjamin Franklin House. The first is that if you haven't tuned into our previous lectures, then you might not be aware that we are reopening to the public, which is very exciting. UK government guidance has allowed us, museums and galleries, to reopen with social distancing measures in place. So starting from this Friday, we will be doing architectural tours Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at our usual times of 12, 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3:15, and 4:15. So if you are based in London, we would welcome you to join us. We do have safety measures in place, so please do visit our website for more information about what those are and also to book tickets. The other thing that I wanted to say was that our director, Dr. Marcia Balastiano, will be doing a Q&A, an informal Q&A tomorrow at 3 p.m. British Standard Time, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And so we do encourage you, if you're interested in kind of seeing what the house is doing next in terms of the reopening and for the future, to join us. It is available via Eventbrite, so just search for Benjamin Franklin House Director Q&A to register for this event. So today I will be speaking about coffee houses and how Benjamin Franklin used these places to solidify his ideas of what a new nation would look like. Coffee houses were the center of the Enlightenment movement in London and lended to a different type of discourse that you wouldn't have had at a gin palace or a tavern. So this was partly due to the stimulant nature of the drink itself, but also that these were gathering places where intelligent conversation was expected. It wouldn't be uncommon for a stranger to approach you to discuss the news of the day, which, if you can imagine a coffee house or a coffee shop today, that'd be a little bit strange if someone came and tried to have a conversation with you. But it's in these establishments that Benjamin Franklin was able to interact with his Enlightenment peers to discuss topics ranging from the science of air to morality. Benjamin Franklin was a man who truly believed in collaboration, as evidenced by his many letters seeking advice and thoughts from other men of learning, but also by the fact that he never patented any of his inventions, with the idea that they should have a life of their own and be developed and evolved past his time. So when Benjamin Franklin arrived in London in 1757, he was keen to find other like-minded individuals, most likely inspired by one of his early projects in Philadelphia called the Junto Club, which was a mutual improvement society founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1727 to debate on a variety of topics. Thus, the environment of a coffee house would have been all too familiar to him. To understand how he was inspired by these places, it's important to give the context of his 16-year stint in London. He was originally sent to London in 1757 by the Pennsylvania Assembly to negotiate with the Penn family, who were the proprietors of the colony of Pennsylvania. They were technically responsible for taking most of the financial burden that they were getting in the colony, but sadly they refused to. He then returned to Philadelphia in 1763 for a short 18-month period before returning back to London a second time, when he did some of his most promising work as a colonial envoy to the crown. He managed to, through his own testimony before Parliament, convince them to repeal the Stamp Act, which imposed a tax on all paper goods within the American colonies. The British Empire was desperately looking for sources of revenue after the very expensive 7 Years' War. But this was unconstitutional according to the colonial charter and created an uproar in the American colonies. The repeal of the Stamp Act was Franklin's biggest diplomatic success on behalf of the American colonies at the time. While he was in London, he hoped to develop a Commonwealth relationship, similar to what would later happen with Canada. But his pleas for negotiation fell on deaf ears, which ultimately led him to leave London in 1775. Collaborative environment of coffee houses that gave him the hope that there might be some solution to mend the rift. And before I move on to the next slide, I just want to point out the images on the screen. So on the left-hand side, you'll see this image of Benjamin Franklin. This is during his time in London. It's by David Martin in 1767. And this is kind of an idealized version of Franklin as kind of the British gentleman. And actually, while he was living in London, he really did play that part, although we know for a fact that he didn't wear powdered wigs and probably didn't have as much finery, but we do know that he was very diplomatically savvy. So he probably would have had some sort of version of at least the clothes to kind of fit better within society at the time. And on the right-hand side is actually from our virtual Georgian interior, which we were generously funded by the Robert H. Smith Family Foundation and the National Lottery Heritage Fund to create digital resources for the house. And one of which was this rendering of what the rooms would have looked like when Franklin lived here. If you have been to the house, you may already know that the rooms are empty. This was a curatorial choice, mostly because we want the rooms to speak for themselves, but we did get a lot of feedback that people were wondering what it looked like, so we created this through research. So this is Franklin's parlor. This is the space that he would have lived in when he was in London, and that table there would have been where he did a lot of his writing and his letters to people at this time. So these coffee houses were a big part of the fabric of 18th century London. The 18th century was a period of rapid growth for London in terms of population, but also in terms of gravitas. It was the beginning of what would later become the Industrial Revolution. London itself was becoming the center of an ever-growing British Empire, which hadn't even reached its peak yet. By the end of the century, nearly 1 million people lived in London, about 1/10 of the population of Great Britain. As you can see from this map on the right-hand side, most of London was north of the river and pretty densely packed. London had also started to develop westward, so areas such as Mayfair and Marylebone, which are very established parts of London now, were being built during this period. And Westminster, where Benjamin Franklin lived, always being continuously developed. One such example is actually Craven Street, where Benjamin Franklin House is, which was actually part of a gentrification project in the area in the 1720s. Although this was a time of prosperity for the city, 18th century London was actually quite a dirty place. Health and hygiene wasn't what it was today, of course. Water was not drinkable, so most people would drink watered down beer or ale, commonly called little beer. So even children would drink this, if you can imagine that. And this is important for the context of coffee houses because the introduction of a non-alcoholic beverage in the lives of Londoners was revolutionary. It was on the fringes of the city where the coffee houses found really their home. For the first time, coffee houses provided an alternative to the public houses and taverns that people of London would often frequent. The first coffee house in London was built in 1652 by a Greek man named Pascal Rosé, who was working for a Levant merchant in Turkey when he discovered the beverage. He built a basic hut when he returned to London, which would have been around the corner from St. Michael's Church in the city here in London. Most other sellers in the area mocked Pasqua in his hut, thinking he would get no business, but they were severely mistaken. By the end of his first year of business, he was serving over 600 cups of coffee per day. And it was clear that the drink had taken London by storm. By the 1750s, there were many more established coffee houses across London. Contemporaries would often count in between 1,000 and 8,000 coffee houses in London, but modern historians think it would have been closer to 550. And as you can see from this painting on the left, this drawing of a London coffee house, that coffee houses would have had long tables with different news clippings and information to be tossed among the patrons. And they acted as prompts to encourage debate and discussion. And in fact, these coffee houses often became printers as well because they printed all of these pamphlets and materials that the patrons would use for their debates. When you entered a coffee house, the common greeting from new patrons was, "What news have you?" or "Your servant, sir, what news from Tripoli?" It was one of the few places where people of different classes could interact if they could afford entry. This is because they were usually affordable, costing a few pennies to enter for coffee and conversation, which is why they were sometimes known as penny universities to outsiders. You were also judged by other patrons based on the kind of news and perspectives you brought to the table. This fostered great debate, particularly in the political world, where various political factions would voice their opinions in this coffee house setting. Teachers would also bring students to show off their knowledge and advertise their superior teaching to the other patrons. And actually on the right-hand side, you'll see that there is this image that is from an article from The Economist from 2011 by John Berkeley, but it gives you a good idea of the kind of conversations with a modern twist, of course, that you would have in these coffee houses. My particular favorite is Facebook is Visage Book. So, but yeah, so it's that idea of many different topics could be happening at the same time as people were debating, and it's quite manic. Benjamin Franklin, who was a keen observer, was very interested in these environments where collaboration as well as debate was actively encouraged. Now I want to show you next this very nice map illustrated by Adam Dant. Proximity of these different coffee houses, and each had their kind of different characters that developed over time. So not on this map, but for example, there was the Latin House in Clerkenwell, which encouraged people to speak Latin. Don Saltero's coffee house in Chelsea welcomed the scientific community. We know that Sir Isaac Newton frequented particularly Don Saltero's, and Benjamin Franklin actually writes in a letter that he is disappointed that he never met Sir Isaac Newton. Other things that you may not realize is that a lot of kind of the businesses that are very well established today had their starting in coffee houses. For example, you may see on the screen, I'm going to circle it here, but Lloyd's, that actually became Lloyd's Bank. So a lot of the coffee houses developed into, became places where businesses developed. Same with the auction houses of Sotheby's and Christie's. They all had their starts in coffee houses. So Benjamin Franklin spent most of his time at the Pennsylvania Coffee House on Bergen Lane, which is right here on the screen. When he arrived in London, he even asked his friends and family back home to direct mail to him there directly. Therefore, he spent a lot of time in coffee houses, waiting to receive mail, but also to stay up to date on news from the colonies. In fact, we know that Benjamin Franklin partly chose 36 Craven Street to live when he was in London because of its proximity to the coffee houses of the Enlightenment period. Of course, also because it was quite close to Parliament and near where the Penn family was living at the time, which was Spring Gardens, which today is just on the other side of Trafalgar Square. And if you haven't visited us before, Benjamin Franklin House is actually just tucked behind Charing Cross Station. So we're very centrally located in London now. So you'll see also from this map that Pennsylvania was not the only colony with a coffee house, but also New York and Virginia. So New York was right here and Virginia was right here, very close together. And they both related to specifically a trade in those colonies. So this is how you would keep informed about news on both sides of the Atlantic. So why were people so obsessed with coffee in the 1700s? Why that beverage? Was it potentially for the taste? Well, I really like this proverb of 18th century coffee that described it as black as hell, strong as death, sweet as love, which is an interesting picture to have. But of course, it's very different than the coffee we have today. Dr. Matthew Green, who's a British historian, wrote that the arrival of coffee then triggered a dawn of sobriety. He credits the arrival of coffee houses with a boom in business, politics, and Enlightenment thinking because essentially people were no longer drunk all day. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Londoners went from drinking beer every day to drinking caffeinated beverages. This sudden sobriety allowed for intelligent conversation on a daily basis. But coffee houses were often the territory of men. So scenes such as the one that you see on the screen would most likely have happened in the privacy of someone's home. In fact, there was a famous petition in 1674 where women called for the banishment of coffee. And this was in response to the popularity of the beverage. Now, it's actually a satirical pamphlet, so we don't know 100% whether or not it was actually women who even wrote it. But it gives you a good idea of the counter reaction to the popularity of the drink. But by the end of the 18th century, tea had cemented itself as the national drink, and other beverages such as gin and ale continued to be prevalent in the life of Londoners. Salons became popular as an alternative to coffee houses, as most women were not admitted to the coffee houses at that time. This allowed for a boom in culture as well, with wealthy patrons commissioning music, art, and poetry for these more intimate settings. When Franklin lived in London, he actually even created a musical instrument called the glass harmonica that was particularly suited for this sort of environment. So the painting that you see on the screen there of these women telling fortunes in coffee probably would have most happened in the salon environments at the time. So coffee houses were really seen as a place for the meeting of the minds for mostly men. So what I want to talk about next is actually some of the Enlightenment thinkers that Benjamin Franklin interacted the most with in these coffee house environments, and how it really shaped his ideas to do with science, morality, and all that sort of thing. So of course, he met with many more people, but these are kind of the 4 people that I've chosen for this presentation to discuss. So the first person I was going to speak about is Thomas Paine. whose pamphlet Common Sense was very influential in the American Revolution. It was so influential that John Adams, who later became president, said was actually the thing that actually sparked the American Revolution was the pamphlet. And Franklin was actually very instrumental in getting him to move to America and made the proper introductions for him to make his life over there in 1774. While in these coffee houses, he also met scientists such as Dr. John Pringle and Dr. Joseph Priestley. He knew these men through the scientific community, as they were all groundbreakers in their field. And actually, when Franklin moved to London in 1757, he was most known for his scientific experiment, particularly his kite and key experiment, which led to the discovery of electricity. Dr. John Pringle was well known for his work on battlefield medicine, a subject that Franklin was fascinated with. And as the head of the Royal Society, he would also often accompany Franklin on his trips to do with scientific endeavors. So Dr. Joseph Priestley experimented with electricity and air, and of course founded the Unitarian Church. And he inadvertently discovered gases, so including oxygen, which kind of led to the foundation of studies such as ecology. And interestingly, Joseph Priestley was the actual one who recommended 36 Craven Street to Benjamin Franklin when he moved to London as a place to stay, as he used landlady Margaret Stevenson. Both these men were also outspoken philosophers who Franklin would debate issues of morality and humanity with on a daily basis. These are thoroughly documented in their correspondence over the years, which can be seen online actually on the Franklin Papers, which is a digital library created by Yale University, which was to digitize all of Franklin-related letters. Franklin was a prolific writer, so as you can imagine, this has been taking a very long time, but it is keyword searchable, so if you are interested in seeing what Benjamin Franklin thought on any given topic, it's very easy to find that sort of information. So Benjamin Franklin, he turned to these men of science to help talk through ideas, particularly of morality and humanity, which I think later contributed to his ideas behind the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So last but not least, William Pitt, the elder, who would later become the prime minister, was also influential in Franklin's political thinking. William Pitt sided with the colonials and spoke in Parliament about how he believed that they did not have the authority to tax the colonies and that it was unconstitutional. Franklin supported this in his testimony against the American Stamp Act in 1765, and this was the first time someone in Parliament had started to poke holes in the delicate fabric of the relationship between the American colonies and the British Crown. So how are all these things connected? Well, I would argue that these coffee houses helped Franklin into the founding father and patriot he would become by the end of his time in London. For one thing, the rebellion in the colonies was the talk of the town. Several taxes on goods, such as stamps and tea, placed a financial burden on the people of the colonies who had nowhere to voice their concern, that they had no representation in Parliament. And you may have heard, of course, the famous phrase of taxation without representation, which is very much represented in this. So Benjamin Franklin was actually the closest representation they had. By the time he left London in 1775, he had become the representative of not only Pennsylvania, but Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Georgia, which is why we actually call Benjamin Franklin House the first de facto American embassy. And the environment of coffee houses were often where political movements were born. But Franklin found himself getting frustrated at the misinformation spread to make the colonial unrest seem unfounded. Much like the fake news of its day, he became infuriated by the fake oratory these politicians were saying and how it would affect public opinion for the American cause. By 1765, tensions had been building and Americans were desperate for their voices to be heard. Franklin's home was almost burnt to the ground when news spread that he might have supported the Stamp Act. A letter from his friend Samuel Wharton in 1765 says, "In the evening, a large mob was collected at the coffee house, and the party declared that your house, Mr. Hughes, Mr. Galloway's, and mine should be leveled with the street." This threat to burn down his house really hit a chord with Franklin, and was in part why he wrote a reply to the London Chronicle after hearing in Coffee House's false report of the rebellion. He mentions that he finds it unjust that the speakers in the coffee houses say that all the colonies should be punished for the rebellion, when only the colony of New York is not sending their taxes due back to London. I think this really illustrates the push and the pull Franklin felt as he was looking for a compromise, even signing this letter that he sent to the London Chronicle as a friend of both countries. Even with the best intentions, Franklin began to feel the pull to return to Philadelphia. These coffee house orations became a good barometer for Franklin to also test the waters on public sentiment, and it became abundantly clear by 1775 that nothing more could be done to mend the rift. Franklin truly became a revolutionary when he was forced to leave in 1775. This was due to the Hutchinson affair. When the royal governor of Massachusetts at the time, Thomas Hutchinson, wrote some incendiary letters asking that the people of Massachusetts not only have some of their liberties taken away, but that the troops should be sent to help contain the unrest. To give you context, this was around the same time as the Boston Tea Party in 1773. So there was a lot of unrest, particularly around the city of Boston. These letters were leaked and sent back to Massachusetts, first to the governing body, and then they were later published for wider consumption. And it became clear very quickly that these letters were going to create a significant uproar. Franklin took responsibility for the leak to prevent a duel from happening between two other people here in London who had actually nothing to do with it. To this day, we're still not 100% sure where Franklin got the letters or whether he really was the person who leaked them. What we do know is that he was the Postmaster General of the colonies and most likely would have had access to any kind of correspondence. The truth is that this was perfect timing for Franklin to go back to help with the foundation of the United States. His time in the coffee houses allowed him to explore the political sentiments of 18th century London and feelings towards the American cause. Benjamin Franklin, of course, went on to sign the Declaration of Independence, became ambassador to France, and is the only founding father to have signed all 4 founding documents of the United States, which include the Declaration of Independence, of course, the Treaty of Alliance with France, the Treaty of Paris, and the US Constitution. As the oldest founding father, he was around 70 when he signed the Declaration of Independence, and he would have seen the most change in his lifetime. As a man with only 2 years of formal education, he continued to try to better himself through discussion and discovery, which is why he found his home in those coffee houses back in London. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that fascinating talk, Caitlin. We do have some time now for questions. If anyone would like to ask questions, there are 2 main ways that you can do that. Either you can use the raise hand button, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen, and then I can unmute your microphone and you can ask your question to Caitlin directly over the audio. The other way is to type your question into the Q&A box, and then I can read that out to Caitlin and she can answer it live too. So do let us know if you have any questions. I actually had a question for you, Caitlin, to begin with. You mentioned the kind of satirical critique of coffee houses, and I just wondered what some of the critiques were, what problems people thought there were with coffee houses at the time.
Well, for one, they were, as I mentioned, they were the place where mostly men went. And as women were not allowed access to it, a lot of rumors circulated about what actually happened in coffee houses. And for a long time, it was actually where a lot of the elite were going as well. So before they kind of made it more, before they became more common. And the stimulant nature of the beverage also created lots of rumors about how it was kind of making people crazy, and it was the devil's beverage. So, but interestingly, they also considered it to be a healthier beverage than having, for example, ale or beer every day. So it's an interesting kind of the balance in between the good and the bad with the coffee.
Thanks so much. And we haven't got any questions for the time being. I had one more question, if that's okay. That was about you. I love that map of the different coffee houses in London, and it was interesting to see that there were wasn't just one for Pennsylvania, but for several of the American colonies. And I wondered if there were kind of corresponding coffee houses in the colonies themselves, or if coffee hadn't made it there yet.
So there were coffee houses in the colonies as well. So the quote that I actually said from Samuel Wharton is specifically to a coffee house that's in Pennsylvania. So that, yes, that's how they would have, the letters would have gone in between the Pennsylvania and London, would have been directed to the Pennsylvania coffee house. So yeah, there was a direct connection.
Fantastic, thank you so much. We do have a question now from Patricia Schaffenberg, and she writes, I understand that slaves were sold at the London Coffee House in Philadelphia. Do you know if that happened to any extent in London?
So in my research, I didn't come across specifically that, but you know, slavery at that time was legal in London, so I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. Unfortunately, these were places where men would debate and speak on topics and do business. So unfortunately, that included slavery. So, but I don't have any particular. I didn't see any particular research on that.
Thanks. We have a kind of related question as well from Neil, who asks whether Franklin got involved in any business or commercial transactions through the coffee houses, or was his involvement with them more on the kind of diplomatic and political side of things?
That's a good question. So it was mostly from the diplomatic and scientific side of things. Of course, he still had a printing press back in Philadelphia, so he did have business ventures that were intrinsically linked. But especially because coffee houses also became, you know, their own printing business. But at that point, he had actually kind of retired from his business life, and he was focusing on becoming a diplomat and a scientist.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Okay, so unless there are any further questions, we're going to be ending this in a moment. But before we go, I know some people were joining a little after the start, and just a reminder, Caitlin mentioned it at the beginning, that we're really delighted to be able to announce that Benjamin Franklin House is partially reopening to the public from this Friday. So we're going to be open on Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays going forward, running our architectural tours of the house, which does involve a demonstration of the glass harmonica, which Caitlin also mentioned in her talk. So those will be running at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3:15 and 4:15. So we hope that those of you joining us from London might be able to visit. Penny Smith says, thank you, very interesting. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. And one last reminder as well, Caitlin also mentioned at the beginning how our director, Dr. Marcia Balaciano, will be giving a Q&A tomorrow all about the reopening and our future plans for the house. So if you're in, please do join us for that if you're interested. You can find it via Eventbrite if you search in Directors Q&A, Benjamin Franklin House. Yvonne also says thank you, it was a great talk. Thanks again everyone for joining, and we hope that you might be able to join us for our talk again next week at the same time. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Bye.